Hello everyone! Today we're going to talk about the strongest, most meta-defining character they've ever released in Atelier Resleriana, Awakened Resna. Resna is a completely absurd attacker. I'm not really sure how she got past the balance team, but here we are, and yeah, we're just going to talk about her, how she has completely warped the Roman tournament meta around her, and also how she might apply to normal teams as well. This video will mainly be from a perspective of the Roman tournament setup, just to sort of talk about the team a little bit, let you know what to be looking forward to if you want to save to put together this team on global in the future, and also just sort of the gear you need to make to prepare for this team to come to the game, and just like a few other things like that. Now, as you can see here, my current score in Roman tournament is rank 60 with 123 million damage. Yes, the Japanese server is pretty dang competitive. If we look at the ranking, you can see that number 1 has 200 million points. This is basically 2 damage capped hits with Resna. For those of you who don't know, the damage cap used to be 9.999 million, and they recently raised it to 99.999 million, so 100 million damage. They have raised it on global now as well, and this is what tournament's going to look like now that they have raised the damage cap. Everyone's going to be doing a lot more damage. And despite the fact that this is the Slash tournament, I would be willing to bet money that every single score, or maybe like 95% of the scores in the top 100, are not using a single Slash character. They're almost all going to be with the Awakened Resna team. Very few, if any, of these scores will be with a different team, so. And surely for top 50, it's almost all Awakened Resna as well. It's probably possible to get good scores with Slash, but Awakened Resna is far easier to get the damage, so. Let's just go ahead and look at the characters. I'm gonna sort of quickly explain each character and what they're good for, and then we'll do a quick showcase of the tournament and then talk about gear. So first up, Awakened Resna, the star of the team. She is a fire attacker and she has her harem of supporters. We just have 4 supporters for her. That makes sense for tournament. Usually you're just trying to get as much damage as possible, so you stack your team with 1 attacker and 4 supporters, and Resna is our attacker of choice. Now, the main reason that Resna is so strong is because of this passive right here, where when she is healed, when she receives any HP recovery, she has a high chance to gain a buff, which is 50% fire damage for 1 turn. You can get this buff for as many times as you get healed in that 1 turn, and the chance of receiving the buff, I believe, is about 50%. It's probably exactly 50%. Now, for the tournament, it's very common to stack this buff up like 10 to 12 times, which makes this, 500 to 600% skill damage from a passive. That is obviously far and away the strongest passive in the game. However, it gets even worse when it's compounded with damage buffet and other sources of received buff effect. Overall, between buffet traits and her gear, Resna has about 200% received buff effects, which means each one of these is 150% skill damage. It's tripled. So if you're stacking this buff 10 times, that's already 1500% skill damage, making Resna like far and away the strongest character they've ever released. And it is chance-based. You do have to roll for it. Sometimes you'll get 6 buffs, sometimes you'll get like 14, but that's just how it is, right? Since it's tournament, you can just do it over and over again until you get the best score. Now, on top of that, her burst is AoE, so we're actually not using the burst, we're using her skill 2 to deal damage because it's a single target. What this ends up meaning is that also Resna doesn't need burst panels to deal damage in tournament, which gives you a lot more freedom on the timeline, which is really nice. And it's just a really solid skill as well on top of that. It's 300% damage rate, which is kind of middle. It's pretty mid, it's middle of the pack. But its effects are really, really strong. After using it, she gets 40% magic attack for you know, 2 turns, which basically means she's giving herself another 110% magic attack, which is crazy, right? Because you just ramp this up and then she has 2 stacks of it forever if she's only using her skill 2, and 110% magic attack is like a lot. So yeah, really, really crazy. That's including the buff effect, right? So, and then the other effect of it is it lowers the enemy's fire resistance by 25% for 5 attacks before attacking. So when she hits an enemy, this will always be up, basically, for the rest of the battle, because 5 attacks is a lot, and it is before attacking. So for her first attack on the boss, you know, it'll have minus 25%, and the second attack on the boss, it'll have minus 50% fire res. It's just very, very, very strong. Very good skill too. And that's why she's good in tournament. She also has this other passive, which increases the effect of boost panels by 50%, so if you get any blue panels, that's a nice little bonus. And then for normal gameplay, normally you're going to use her burst. Her burst is AoE. Because of her passive, you can stack your party with heals, and she'll be doing far and away more damage than basically any other attacker in the game for the burst. However, she does end up being a little bit slow, so she's not a good sweeper, but she will do a lot of damage if you get her set up with the burst. She does have a transformation gimmick where basically she needs to use her skill 2 once to get this set of skills. She has 2 sets of skills, one for being untransformed and one for being transformed. She basically just needs to use her skill 2 once to transform, and then she gets the really good version of the burst, and also the passive that scales damage based on receiving heals. So she doesn't have this passive unless she is transformed. So she ends up being a little slow by design, which means she's not good for sweeping. But if you just need to get like an SS on a score battle or clear tower, she's going to be hitting for like 10 to 20 million damage fairly easily. Easily getting you those clears and SS and stuff like that. So very, very strong just as a sole attacker for, you know, clearing content once. But because she is a burst attacker that requires 2 turns to get set up, she is not a good sweeper like Izana or Swimsuit Ryza. But, you know, you will never regret having her. The amount of damage she puts out is absolutely crazy. And that's about it for Awakened Resna. She's just absurdly strong. For the rest of the characters, I'm just going to go through what they bring to the tournament team very quickly. Heidi, of course, is a magical Ampel, magic version of Ampel. You use her for her skill 2 almost exclusively, which is just 30% magic attack that stacks twice. So with buff effect and stuff like this, she'll be giving, you know, 80% to 100% extra magic attack to Resna. Very, very good. Since we already have skill damage scaling taken care of, and we don't need to do that, we can go lean into other factors like magic attack and critical damage for our supporters. So Heidi, very good there. Then we have Suskia. Suskia is used almost exclusively for her skill 1, which charges your item gauge and gives critical damage 20% for 2 turns to all allies. Now this, to me, is the best supporter skill in the entire game. It is better than most like supporter skill 2s, and it's a skill 1. It charges item gauge, making it easy to double stack items to make your damage even better. And this basically reads, give Resna 250% crit damage, is basically what this reads. That's how it turns out in tournament. You basically are able to use this skill 5 times before Resna goes twice most of the time. So she will basically always have 5 stacks of this buff, scaled with buff A, 250% crit damage. That is just an absolutely absurd skill 1. On top of that, she has a passive, which is very useful when it's relevant, and it's when you use items, all allies gain debuff immunity for 1 turn. So that's really nice. The current tournament, this is very relevant. All of the enemies can apply a skill damage debuff to Resna. You absolutely need to avoid those at all costs. So the route is sort of designed in a way where you use items enough to make Resna immune to debuffs for the entire tournament. Very, very good. And her skill 2 is usable sometimes. It creates a boost plus panel and gives a permanent stacking magic attack buff. So if you can, you know, speed tune in a way which you can fit in a skill 2 for Suskia early, it's not bad for this magic attack buff, but you're usually just using her skill 1. Then next we have Claudia. Everyone knows her and loves her from Global. Her skill 2 is just completely busted, right? It's 30% magic attack damage taken, stacking up to 4 times. Since we're not hitting the boss at all until we're ready to do our burst damage, this basically says 300% increased magic damage taken when she is properly geared, and you have 4 stacks of it. So in tournament, you will get to 4 stacks of it. Claudia's broken, don't really need to say much else on her. And then last but not least, we have the new fire supporter, Sophie, and every single one of her skills is actually good for the team. First up, we have her skill 1, which when you use this, it has a heal for everyone. Obviously more heals is more good for Resna, and it gives a little bit of a skill damage buff. This is very comparable to like Liddy's skill 2, is just like half as effective because it's a skill 1. Very strong skill 1. Then we have her skill 2, which is a little bit of a magic attack and fire damage buff for 2 turns, so it's nice that it lasts for 2 turns. And on top of that, it has a unique type of buff where she will apply this buff to the ally she uses the skill on that will make that ally give 25% negative fire resist before their next attack. So you can use it on Resna and she will just apply this debuff when she attacks, or you can use it on Claudia as well and she will apply this debuff to all enemies without dealing damage. It's also worth mentioning that this debuff does scale with buff effect, so this 25% will scale with any buff effect or received buff effect you happen to have. So because Resna gets like 40% received buff effect, you end up having this around like 37%, so it's even stronger than it looks. It's pretty dang good as a skill 2. And then her burst as well. When she uses it, she will permanently give all allies 100% skill damage when attacking a weakness, and then she will also give the highest magic attack ally 50% magic attack for 1 turn. So 100% magic attack, 100% skill damage and 50% magic attack is just a really, really solid buff for a burst. And yeah, Sophie ends up being very strong. All these characters together give a lot of damage. Sophie as well has very good passives for just, you know, generic damage, 10% magic attack, 30% skill damage. So very, very good. And then for leader skills, we do end up using Heidi's leader skill, which is just a heal at the start of the turn. This, of course, is for more passive stacks on Resna. It's the best leader skill we have access to. So that is the basic overview of the team for tournament. For general play, you probably won't use this exact team. It's comfier to have something like a crit support and a defender for a lot of content. So you'd probably drop maybe like Heidi, maybe Suskia. It just sort of depends. For general content though, like Awaken Resna and Claudia are all you really need to do a ton of damage, and then stack as many heals as possible and stuff like that. So, you know, Slash Verona is good, Toturi is good. There's a lot of versatility when, you know, applying this team to general content. Will Bell is quite good, but for tournament, this is the optimized team right now, and let's just show it off a little bit. Show how it works, how much damage it does, and stuff like that. Hopefully we make it through this tournament. It's not too bad, but yeah, we're gonna start off with Sophie's skill 2 on Claudia. Like I mentioned before, Claudia will also apply the fire res debuff, so we're just going to get that debuff on all enemies, including the jellyfish, which is what we're attacking for damage. And Suskia is going to be using her skill 1 basically the entire time here. The goal here is basically to keep 1 enemy alive for all of our supporters to spam their skills into, and while we stack debuffs on the boss and buffs on Resna, and then we just do a large amount of damage after that. So yeah, we have to keep 1 enemy alive just so that we don't consume the debuffs on the boss. So right now we're going to start stacking debuffs with Claudia. Like I mentioned before, we need to route items in a way that Resna is debuff immune, so that's why we're using items right now. And as you can see there, Claudia gave the fire resistance debuff at the start, and then her normal debuffs later. And for the first couple turns, Resna is just going to pick off the smaller enemies while we continue to stack debuffs on the boss. Currently, you can see she's untransformed. but after using her skill 2 once to take care of the sheep, she will transform during this animation, so very, very cool. I do like the concept of the transforming characters, and Resna's super cute. I like that part of her kit a lot. Also, when she transforms the first time, she does use the transformed version of the skill. She doesn't use the weak one, so very good. And then Heidi is just going to start throwing those skill 2s onto Resna for more buffs. Suskia is going to keep using skill 1 into the demon for buffs. Sophie going to use skill 1 for healing and for timeline manipulation. You can see here she's going to get the burst panel for all of her burst buffs. And yeah, we just basically do that for the rest of the fight. Claudia, once again, debuffing everything. And at the start of Resna's turn, you'll see with her regen, she will get fire damage debuffs, all of those, or fire damage buffs, all those buffs right there. Those are from healing. We have a lot of turn start healing, and you can see the buffs are already starting to stack up. Now, these ones aren't going to help us for they're not going to help us for, you know, taking care of the jellyfish, but they will let us do enough damage to kill the ghost. And we will start stacking up a ton of buffs on her for the hitting the jellyfish on this turn. As you can see, we have a lot of turns coming up before then, so we'll be able to stack a lot of buffs. And as well, we're going to start using items here to double stack items onto Resna. Specifically, we have 2 Flame Aquas for debuffs on the boss and a Cocktail Lab for healing. Cocktail Lab ends up being the best healing item for Resna. It does give her 3 total heals per use, which is very strong. But yeah, we're just going to continue the process of stacking up basically endless amounts of buffs and debuffs, and hopefully Claudia does not get targeted here. The demon will kill anyone. Oh my god. Okay. Well, the 1 in 5 chance that we lose there. Let's just go ahead and reset that so I can actually show this off. And we'll just rush through the battle real quick. Unfortunately, that just kind of happens with tournaments sometimes, you know, there's RNG involved always. But yeah, the team just, it's so crazy, right? It stacks so many buffs, so many debuffs. You just end up getting so much damage, and it's... Okay, this is one of the super rare scenarios that also doesn't work out. So let's go ahead and reset that. Usually the strat for this is pretty consistent outside of rolling the buffs on Resna, because like I mentioned before, it's a 50% chance every time she gets healed to get a buff, and you want to get as many as possible. And the team also doesn't have any guaranteed crits, which is why you would usually use like a crit support or something like that for normal content. For tournament, you know, crit supports are going to be less damage, so you're going to rely on getting crit through critical finish from like the Cocktail Lab, right? Which is another reason we use that, because Resna does need some amount of crit chance. So there is a lot of RNG when it comes to rolling Resna's damage, but usually not so much when it comes to what the enemies are doing, at least for this strat, which is kind of the way you want to keep it, because the more RNG you pile on, like the worse tournament gets, obviously, ends up feeling really bad. When you already need to reset a lot of times to get those fire damage buffs stacks onto Resna, right? I believe the math works out to something like, for this specific strat I have right here, we heal Resna 16 times for her first hit on the jellyfish for her burst damage. I believe the math is something like you get 10 stacks of the buff like 30% of the time, or maybe, no, 16% of the time, something like that. And you get 12 stacks of the buff like 3% of the time. So, you know, with those odds, you have to reset a lot to like maximize your damage, right? And then rolling crits on top of that. With the item setup we currently have, it'll be about a 60% chance for her to crit on the jellyfish, which that is of course the only enemy where the crit actually matters, since that's the one with the infinite HP. But alright, we're almost back to where we were. And it will be fun to show off all of the buffs and debuffs that we have once we get there, because it is quite something. You really do just stack up so much damage with a team like this. As long as the demon does not decide to randomly lock onto Claudia again. What is wrong with this game? As far as I know, the targeting there is completely random, so that should be a 20% chance to happen. Unfortunately, if a character dies, it ruins the whole timeline, and there's like nothing you can do, right? You just have to reset. But let's go through it again, and hopefully the demon does decide to target someone other than Claudia. Alright, hit Resna this time. That is perfectly fine. But yeah, tournament's kind of a struggle. Certain tournaments, like the Izana tournament, the Bolt tournament that's currently going on global right now, have very like low RNG, which feels pretty nice. This one, a bit more RNG. Most of them are a bit more RNG than that one though. But usually it's not too bad outside of, like, usually it's not too bad to finish a run. It's just about rolling the buffs on Resna. That's where the real pain comes in. Also, like, I'm definitely getting pretty unlucky because the failure condition with this demon's attack, right, is that it targets the same party member twice in a row, which is a 20% chance of happening, so realistically it should not happen again. It just needs to target anyone except for Resna, and we'll be fine. Nice crit on Sophie. That's a little bit of extra damage at the end, although it's pretty negligible overall. That's the type of thing you would be rolling for if you were actually at the top, hitting 200 million damage. Alright, perfect. We survived. Now we can actually make progress. And like I said before, we're just continuing to stack heals, debuffs, other buffs on everyone, and yeah, it's gonna be a lot, so. Almost there. And so at the start of Resna's turn, it's always fun to see how many buffs she gets from the regen that we have stacked up on her, and you can see right there, she got a whole bunch. And then we get to use items, and we get to see it again. So more heals, more buffs at the start of the turn. That was a pretty bad roll. But as you can see here, we have a lot of stacks of these fire damage buffs. Every 144% is one of the buffs that she got from healing, and then a whole ton of other buffs as well. The buff list is very long. for this run, for the heal procs, we ended up getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is a pretty low roll. So if we crit, our damage will probably be about 55 million. With a higher roll, we can get up to 80 million or even damage cap with a lot of luck, but that's pretty unreasonable. And as far as the enemy goes, you can see all of these debuffs stacked on the enemy as well, on the jellyfish. And it has minus 254% fire res, which will increase once Resna attacks it. And hopefully we crit here so we can see the massive damage, 60 million damage, so. And that's with a low roll on the buff stacks. And yeah, that's about how it goes. The second hit is going to be more of the same. Resna still has a lot of her buffs stacked up from before. And as well, the jellyfish still has most of its debuffs stacked up, so. Including all of the Claudio ones. Now, because we're getting our crit chance from critical finish on the cocktail lab item, our crits are not guaranteed, unfortunately, and the crit chance for the second hit on the jellyfish that we have is going to be a bit lower. The first crit was about 1 in 3, or was about 60%, and the second crit will be about 1 in 3, so the odds aren't terrible, but when you combine the crit odds along with having to roll good stacks of your healing buffs, it can get pretty overwhelming and take a while to get a good run. So we have one last item used here for more heals, more regen. And as you can see, we have 3, 4, we have 4 buffs, so that's also a pretty low roll. This is a 7-4 run. My PB of 123 million is a 10-7 run, so 10 buffs on the first hit, 7 on the second, that crit on both hits, so much better than this one. And do we even crit here? We do not. We do have about 7 to 8 times damage on crits, so if that did crit, we would have hit about 100 million damage, which, you know, nothing to scoff at. That's still a top 100 score, but yeah, that is the team. Now, you're probably all wondering at this point, you know, how do I prepare for this team when it comes to global? What kind of gear do I need to make? And don't worry, I have you covered there. We're gonna go over all of their best gear, and then I'll go over the gear that I have as well for each character. So I have this little scuffed slideshow right here. I hope you don't mind it being kind of low effort, but it will show everything that we need for each character. So first up we have Resna, and her best gear is going to be Fortune Staff, which is a limited item from the New Year's event. The reason this is the best item is because it gives crit damage for attackers on single target attacks. There's other weapon options, but most of them give skill damage. Like the tome from Tower, the fire tome gives skill damage, and because our skill damage is so saturated, because we're gonna end up having like 1700 to 1800% skill damage or even more, we don't actually want an item that gives skill damage. So the next best thing is an item that gives crit damage, or the best thing is an item that gives crit damage, and the only one that really works for us is the Fortune Staff. So this is going to be our best in slot weapon for Resna. There's also a couple other options like the Slingshot for Heidi, which we'll get into later, but it ends up being worse than the Fortune Staff most of the time, so I recommend just making this. Then we have the Wanderer's Clothes, classic buff effect items. 23% buff effect is a lot. There's not really any contest or question here. Silver Thread is already very good at half of this value, and this one is even better because Resna can actually use it. And then for the accessory, we have the Fire Hairpin. This recipe will come with Resna when she comes out, so you can't make it in advance, but it does the exact same thing as the Wanderer's Clothes. Now, for this item, you probably want versions of both SSR and SR. SR will be a bit worse damage-wise, but it only has 4 speed, and that can be very useful for speed tuning in specific scenarios. The current strat that I just showed uses an SR accessory for the speed, but there will be some strats that want the SSR one and so forth. So it is good to have both of them for the versatility, but if you only have one of them, you can make do. As far as traits go, there is no compromise. She wants skill power, damage buff A on every single piece of gear. This is mandatory. So skill power V, damage buff A, V. This is what you want on every single piece of gear. No crit damage, no burst skill power, just skill power, damage buff A. That is what you're going to get on every single piece of gear. To synthesize this, the best combo is actually the new Mari into Corneria into the conch shell that we'll get during the summer event. The conch shell is skill power and damage buff A. So this will be the best combo. If you do have Mari and want to wait for this combo to start making Resna gear, that is probably a good idea. Just gather pieces on Mari in the meantime. Other than that, any other combo that's double skill power into a damage buff A item will work if you don't have Mari. But if you do have Mari, this is the best combo. If you don't have her, then any classic double skill power combo with a buff A material will be perfectly fine. But you do need specifically these 2 traits. As far as Memoria goes, we're going to be using the Promise to Meet Again Memoria from the 4th banner of the summer event. This Memoria is the best attacker Memoria in the game, and I highly recommend getting it if you want to be competitive in tournament at all, or even just for playing the game in general. Like, it's going to be good on every single attacker. It has a special stat spread of 1.75% speed and 36% magic attack, so more magic attack than a normal Memoria and less speed. The less speed is incredibly important for tournament, which makes it basically mandatory, and then on top of that, it gives 100% critical damage at max rank, so you will absolutely be using memory crystals on this. It's super strong, and this critical damage, once again, it scales with damage buff A, so this will end up being like 300% crit damage almost just from the Memoria alone at max rank, on top of giving a good speed stat because you want Resna to be as slow as possible to get as many buffs on her as possible, and a really good magic attack stat. So yeah, this Memoria is absolutely required. Then there's another Memoria option from the 2nd summer banner. It has the same stat spread, but it doesn't have a good effect. The effect is bolt skill damage. If you end up skipping out on the crit damage Memoria, but you happen to have this other Memoria, then this one will work in a pinch because the stat spread is required. But really just get this Memoria. It's super important. And next up I guess I will go over the gear that I have on Resna, which, like I mentioned, we do have that Memoria on her, the summer one. Alright, I can't look at it here anymore. We do have the summer Memoria on her, so mine's only at rank 3. If it was at rank 5, I would get about 20 million damage on my best score for tournament. We'll get it to rank 5 pretty soon. Then for gear, like I mentioned, all of those items with skill power, damage buff A at 10, and the accessory is an SR. SR and SSR both work. It just depends on which strategy you use. The route you have to take through the tournament, the speed tuning, all of that will change based on which rarity of the accessory you're using, and it's good to have access to both of them. Next up, we have Heidi, and her gear is going to be pretty standard buffer gear. Now, you can't currently work on this gear. None of these items are in the game yet. Most of them come with either Heidi when she comes into the game or with Sophie when she comes into the game. So first up we have her slingshot, which is it gives 12% buff effect potency, so for fire characters, so her entire kit is around increasing magic attack, so giving her some buff effect is going to be her best in slot gear. The Valkyrie mail, which comes with Sophie, does the exact same thing. And then we have a couple different accessories. First up, we have the ring. This ring comes with Heidi, and It's for fire supporters. They give 6% magic attack to all allies. This is going to be her best accessory as long as you can get away with it being only 8 speed. However, most of the time you're going to need her to be a bit faster. So I'm currently using the Phoenix bracelet on her, which comes with Sophie, and this basically just gives 5% fire damage to all allies when equipped to a supporter. So it's not like super great, but it gets the job done if you need the speed. And of course, speed is more important than anything else. So if you even need 12 speed on Heidi, then you just go with an accessory that does nothing. But if you can get away with lower speed, the ring will be the best one. And as far as traits go, enhanced damage buffet is actually not super important on Heidi. Obviously, if you're running like the Phoenix bracelet, it's going to be good, but she doesn't have anything in her kit that buffs skill damage. So if you have this set of items, you actually don't care about enhanced damage buffet, and she doesn't have healing either, so you can just go pure defensive traits on Heidi. So physical resistance, magic resistance, all target attack resistance, all of these are going to be good traits on her. If you do happen to be using something like the Phoenix bracelet, or you need speed so you have time to study on her, then of course you want enhanced damage buffet, but in any other scenario you don't actually need it and could go purely defensive, which is really nice. For her Memoria, we have this Memoria, which is basically the same as the Halloween Memoria, which just came out on Global. It's her best in slot. It is 60% buff effect for fire characters, and of course her second best in slot is going to be the Halloween one, which is 45% buff effect for anyone. So these two Memoria are the ones you want to look out for Heidi. However, it's kind of awkward sometimes to use these Memoria because they're both 4% speed, and occasionally a strategy will want Heidi to have like an 11% Memoria instead just to get enough speed. However, I usually kind of try to force these anyways. I have the Halloween one at rank 5, so that's what I use on her. And yeah, I just end up doing that with like a faster accessory like the Phoenix bracelet, and it works out. So overall, her gear is pretty straightforward, and in general it's pretty nice that she doesn't need like some super amazing traits or anything. Honestly, like if you just put the basic gear on her, she would still be fine, but defensive traits always help with rolling RNG in tournaments, so her being able to stay alive longer is still good. So if you do get defensive gear for her, it's pretty nice, but it's lower priority for most setups in my opinion. And as far as the gear that I currently have on Heidi, like I mentioned, I have the Dress Up Outing Memoria at rank 5. That's 45% buff effect, so we're going to go with that one. I do not have the other one that is 60% buff effect, otherwise I would be using that. And for the gear, like I mentioned before, it's just damage buffet on everything because I'm using the Phoenix bracelet. It's just slightly min-max the damage. She doesn't need the defensive stuff, so it's just nice to have if you have good defensive gear for her, but it's not mandatory. Next up, we have Suskia, and Suskia will be using a completely different set of items, and these ones you actually can make in advance. First up, we have the Shadow Guard Staff. This is from Ice Tower, and while equipped to a supporter with Ice Affinity after using a skill, it gives 2 turn HP regen to all allies. This is absolutely crazy. That is a lot of heals for Resna, and the existence of this item specifically on Suskia specifically as well is just kind of completely crazy. It's super busted. Suskia will be supplying like half of the heals that Resna is going to get through this item alone with her skill 1 spam, so really, really, really good. It is worth noting that the SR version of this item only gives 1 turn of regen, so it has to be SSR. Keep that in mind. Next up, we have the Fresh Coat, which is an item made for Rose Fierce, and it's just, crit damage for all allies, just generically good supporter armor for ice supporters. Then we have the Glaco Talon, which is not quite in Global yet. It will be next month. This is from floor 30 of the Ice Tower, and I highly recommend trying to get this item, like trying your best to get this item. Ice Tower is pretty hard. If you have Suskia, it gets a lot easier. And this is just by far her best in slot accessory. You want her to be as fast as possible. It gives a really good amount of crit damage, and it's just really, really strong. For traits, of course, Buffet V is required. It's mandatory on every single piece of gear. And then you can just fill the rest with resistance traits since she doesn't heal. So defense traits, once again, very nice to have, can be very useful for tournament since you have no defender. So defense traits, very nice to have, but not mandatory. You really just need this buffet. Then for Memoria, Saskia almost always wants to be as fast as possible, so you want to go with 11% speed if you can. Her absolute best in slot in most cases is Welcome to the Party, which is basically like Time to Study, except it's specifically for ice characters and gives a bit more skill damage. So if you have Welcome to the Party, that'll be best. If you have Time to Study, that is fine. But any other 11% speed Memoria will work as well. And if you happen to be running a strat that doesn't require 11% speed Memoria, the next best thing is the Fighting for Our Future Memoria, I believe it was called. I like to call it the Fish Memoria because he's on it down here with the fish. And this is the supporters give critical damage to all allies Memoria. Usually you can fit this on someone else and not Saskia and just make Saskia as fast as possible. But this will be the best if you don't need 11% speed. So as far as my Saskia goes, we have Time to Study, like I mentioned. Unfortunately, I only have rank 3 Time to Study on JP, but it's like fine. And then Buffet on all of the gear. My staff actually got pretty lucky and also has rank 5 physical resistance, but the other pieces have nothing. This gear isn't hard to make overall, so yeah. And then we have Claudia. Now, Claudia is the hardest character to make gear for, like, in the entire game, if you want to min-max her gear. Now, these items might look a little bit weird to you if you're used to Claudia on Global, because they are different outside of the flute than what you're used to. First up, we do have the flute. This is the weapon that was made for her, and it's just debuff potency 15%. Very, very strong weapon for her. This will be her best in slot. Then we have the Diligence Robe, which is from Bolt Tower, and this is an item that didn't see any use until Resna came into the game. While equipped to a supporter with Bolt Affinity after using a skill, restores all allies' HP by 2%. This just adds more heals for Resna to get more of those damage buffs, so you absolutely want to make Diligence Robe for Claudia for the Resna team. And then finally, we have the Spirit Belt, which for Bolt supporters, it gives all allies 7% crit damage. Claudia is usually fine with 10 speed, so you can usually use this item, and this will be her best in slot accessory. And then, of course, for traits, we have the classic Reed Fish combo, and you basically don't really care about the other characters used in Synthesis for Claudia gear. Just probably try to make sure they're 5-star, because you're just going for both of these traits no matter what. Obviously, the goal is to get both of them, but the priority is enhanced PM resistance down. You want this at rank 5 on every single piece of gear. And then Buffet is basically kind of like icing on the cake, right? It's not required. It is a very minor optimization. It's very min-maxy. If you can get gear with, you know, both of these traits at rank 5, then that's great. But prioritize the resistance down trait, and any Buffet you get on top is just nice to have. Now, if Claudia does have a Memoria that is going to be scaling damage, you do want to prioritize Buffet a bit more and really try hard for the gear. But on a lot of setups, it's only going to be scaling the Spirit Belt damage. So the Spirit Belt by default is 7% crit damage with full Buffet. It's another 10% on top for all of that gear. So I don't have perfect Claudia gear on JP. It's not super important most of the time, but it is an extra optimization. And if you have the time to make it, since we have a few months before this team comes to Global, you know, do your best to try and get these items, right? Now, as far as Memoria goes, Claudia will usually be your holder for festive, or Feathers Fly on a Festive Day, which is the item charge Memoria from New Year's event. So This is a limited memoria. You can't get this anymore if you don't have it, so I hope you do. It gives 10% item gauge at the start of the turn, so if you need this memoria to double stack those items on Resna, Claudia is usually going to be the character that holds this because she works the best with her base speed. And if you have this on her, damage buffet, not super important. This is what we're using on her right now for the slash tournament. So this will usually go in Claudia if you need it. And then for other memoria choices, we of course have the fish memoria. Again, you do want to make sure you have optimized buffet gear for her if you're going to put this memoria on her. And then as a couple other options, sometimes she'll need 11% speed. For this team, usually not, but of course time to study is the best memoria if that is the case. Then we also have Taste of Civilization if you don't have any of the other memoria. And this is basically just an extra damage taken buff on her. It's a rare memoria, so you will have this, and it works in a pinch. It's a decent memoria. As far as my Claudia gear goes, like I mentioned before, we have the item charge memoria, Feathers Fly. And then as far as the gear goes, like I said, I haven't made good reedfish gear on Claudia, so it's all PM resistance down, and I don't have a single copy of buffet. So that is gear that I need to make eventually, but it's very difficult to make, and it's not very efficient. You would rather get perfect versions of everything else first, so if you just get to this level of gear on Claudia, that is good enough. It's basically you make the buffet stuff when you have nothing else to make. And next up, finally, we have Sophie. Sophie is going to be pretty similar gear to Heidi because they are both fire supporters, but she will be using the Angel Staff instead. As Sophie often gets like more turns than Heidi, the Angel Staff ends up being better, and it just like, she doesn't need as much buff scaling as Heidi does, so yeah, Angel Staff, very good on Sophie. But Valkyrie Mail, Phoenix Bracelet, we went over these already, just very good. Now, Sophie does want enhanced damage buffet, so when you make these items, you do want to give the buffet versions to Sophie first. That's important for her, and I generally just recommend doing this classic synth combo if you can for Sophie, like recovery, buffet, all target attack resistance up. She does have recovery on her skill 1, so more recovery is always useful. You do take a lot of damage in tournament, and the only real source of healing on this team for most of your characters is going to be Sophie's skill 1, because despite having a lot of these like small regen effects, they are small, right? It's like 1%, 1%, 1%, so despite getting a lot of them, they don't really add up to that much overall, but Sophie's skill 1 is quite good. So you prioritize buffet, but any amount of recovery is good. And as far as this material goes, which is a limited material from Academy, we will be getting a blue version of this material that's not limited in a future update, so keep an eye out for that one. That will be very useful in making a lot of the supporter gear, so very good. As far as Memoria goes, once again, just the classic supporter Memoria. Usually Sophie will be going for 11% speed though, so you know, if you don't have enough copies of Time to Study, you probably just are going to use a different high speed Memoria on her. So as far as my Sophie gear goes, I have this Memoria on her. The Memoria effect doesn't matter, it is just 11% speed. I need that for speed tuning, very important. And for her gear, we have damage buffet on everything. For this specific tournament, I actually needed 12 speed on her as well, so I couldn't use the Phoenix Bracelet, so I'm just using a 12 speed accessory. The effect does nothing for her. There isn't a good 12 speed accessory for her. But yeah, we have damage buffet, a little bit of healing, and then basically nothing. So her gear is not very optimized, but it still works as long as you have all of the damage buffet. And that is it for all of the character gear. And finally, we have the usable items, and that will be the last thing. You want one cocktail lab with as much critical finish as possible. I recommend at least getting crit finish 10. It's very hard to get more than 10 because it is a 1 in 20 chance to get 3 crit finishes on the same item. even using the optimal synthesis. And of course for synthesis, it's all like characters you will probably have. You just want to get 3 critical finish. So make sure when you're synthesizing, you have 3 critical finish and it'll all work out. And hopefully you eventually get, you know, your critical finish 10. Then for Flame Aqua, also very hard to make. You want to get as much Fire Curse on an SSR Flame Aqua as possible. Right, for the Cocktail Lab, one thing that's nice about it is the rarity doesn't matter. So I use SR because that's what I hit. The rarity doesn't matter at all. It gives the same instances of heals, amount of heals, right? So 1 heal and then 2 turns regen, so 3 heals total. It gives the same at SR and SSR, so the rarity doesn't matter. For Flame Aqua, of course the rarity matters. Any SR, even with good traits, is going to be worse than an SSR with okay traits. And we're just trying to get as much Fire Curse as possible. Now, currently on Global, the only way to get triple Fire Curse on Flame Aqua is Free Val into Snow Rorona into, you know, a material. If you don't have Snow Rorona, then don't bother making these. These are only worth making if you can get triple Fire Curse. So like, yeah, you can't make them right now if you don't have her, right? However, one thing that is very nice is that Awakened Resna does have Fire Curse, so when you get Awakened Resna, you'll be able to do Awakened Resna into VO for triple Fire Curse, so you don't have to worry about getting a specific character to make good Flame Aquas. Once you have Awakened Resna, then you will guaranteed be able to make good Flame Aquas, right? And I kind of do recommend, if you don't have Rorona, just start getting pieces on VO in advance to get her to 5-star. It matters a lot for usable items. I think at some point they changed something. 5-star used to not matter that much near the start of the game. I think now it matters a lot more than it used to. They randomly change things behind the scenes with synth rate all the time, so especially for usable items. I do recommend getting VO to 5-star just for Flame Aquas. These are what you're going to be dumping most of your mana into. Getting a good Flame Aqua is an absolute grind. It's really bad. It's really, really bad. And on JP, I do have a crit finish 10 Cocktail Lab SR. Then we have a Flame Aqua with 3 Fire Curse, but it's 5, 3, and 1. And then a Flame Aqua with Fire Curse 10. So pretty decent Flame Aquas overall, but these are a grind. The sooner you can start making them, the better. But yeah, that's it for the team. I hope you're all looking forward to it. It is absurdly powerful. Resna's a really good unit. 4 of these units are not yet available on Global, like a lot of the gear isn't, but you can at least start prepping in advance. It makes getting the gear ready a lot easier. I basically had to scramble the past like 2 weeks to get all of this gear ready, and it was really, really rough. So the sooner you can start getting ready, the better, and you'll be able to, you know, if you have everything ready, take top ranks in the tournament on like day 1, right? As soon as she comes out. So yeah, but very good team. I see it being basically the meta for quite some time to come, because in all honesty, it's just so hard to beat the amount of damage Resna gives, and I can't see them making another character like this anytime soon. But it's just, I honestly think Resna was kind of a mistake, kind of an accident. So yeah, that's just how it is. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it all helps you. Hope it helps all of you get gear ready for the future of the game, and I hope this peek into the current meta of Resleri is pretty interesting. Yeah, and this team is probably going to get me my highest tournament placement ever on JP. We're currently sitting at rank 61 with a few days left. Hopefully I get my first top 100 ever. Like I said before, JP is super, super competitive, so as someone that basically only buys selectors, it's hard to keep up with all of the crazy people in here that spend a lot more money, so. But yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. I know it went on a bit long, but yeah, anyways, see y'all later. Have a good one. Bye-bye.